The beat drops and the rhyme drops with its entropy. Syntactics are forming toward planetary synthesis. All the little light filaments that enter the skin combine to about expansion of the system we live in. Learning to stretch with the movement of this system enables the light to magnify ad infinitum. Time of time shifting, set adrift amidst the battle of light warriors and time bandits. I couldn't understand it until I realized we were in transit between a global monopoly and a self-empowered love currency. I got to hand it to the dark side for being organized, but on top of me you are no more now that I have seen through the lies. Accumulated knowledge, now I'm learning to use it wisely. Fashioning a light sword to help me cut through false realities and find a pot of gold at the end of the holographic spectrum. A big dose of truth serum. Passion is medicine, action is introspection. The power that lies within each and every one of us is a complete solar system equipped with the sun to shine when we are in tune and aligned. Each a God divine when we follow the breath inside. Down the nose, down, deep down the spine. Intercellular traveling, connecting dots with lines. Hip-hop beats with rhymes. Every single particle of yours with every single particle of mine. Remembering that we are holy. With the does a bird seem to be heard or seem to be? I am seed for me, I am syntropy. Flying through the galaxy to land in a tree and sing into the air from the depths of what I see deep within my soul. I am seed to be healed, to be whole. Syntax of the sacred has been rearranged to scare. Sacred reveals nature scared as nature impaired. As the sacred is reinstated, nature is repaired. As we release what we fear, we clear the atmosphere of this air inversion. Over densification, the axis of the eternal present is cluttered with confusion. Future heaven vision, see clarity after the dispersion of this build-up of unnecessary. I think we call it history. Bring back the shamans and the sacred geomancy. Rainbow warriors paving the way to save humanity. The Tolkien pulses, bio, psychic conjunctions, contractions, expansions. Birthing processes requires houses for the senses. Bacon's new Atlantis. Come now, the know-how is contained in ourselves. Ourselves hold the keys, the codes to get well. The syntax we enact is a way to break the broken track. Follow the beaten path to the forest to find the way back to the circle. Resound the living cycles. Rejoin the old ones from before the fall. Biospheres collapsing like the Great Wall. Conscious awareness of the noosphere is what we are here for. The call is stand tall and form the art spores.
In 1986, German historian Heribert Illig started developing the phantom time hypothesis. This theory states that the years AD 614 to AD 911 never actually took place, and the early Middle Ages as we know them are a lie. Followers of this idea argue that key historical events and figures, from Charlemagne to Alfred the Great, either existed at another time in history or have never been anything more than fictional. Perhaps they were even the result of deliberate falsifications by a few powerful individuals. But is it true? Are we really living, not in the 21st century, but in the 18th century? A pivotal moment behind this conspiracy was the introduction of the Gregorian calendar in AD 1582 under Pope Gregory XIII. This is the calendar we know and use today. But the Gregorian calendar is really a modified version of the Julian calendar, which was created in 45 BC. However, it had a significant flaw. It was based on lunar cycles, but miscalculated their length, so that each year on the calendar was really 10.8 minutes too long. This may seem like a small mistake, but over time the minutes added up. And in October 1582, the Gregorian calendar was designed to remedy the problem of accumulated time. To do this, it made the calendar 10 days shorter. This event sparked Heribert Illig's first concerns. He calculated that the 1,627 years that had passed since the Julian calendar began in 45 BC actually amassed a 13-day discrepancy. By skipping just 10 days in 1582 instead of 13, the new calendar only accounted for the extra time that had been accumulated up until 1282. Therefore, 300 years were missing from the Pope's calculations. But where did the Pope get an extra 300 years from to bring the calendar up to 1582? Well, the poor quality of material evidence attributed to the early Middle Ages makes this period the most likely candidate to have been fabricated. Historians of the era have always been heavily reliant on written documents, some of which have later emerged as frauds. For example, German historian Horst Fuhrmann has highlighted documents forged by the Roman Catholic Church. The fake documents claim to have been written several hundred years before they actually were, and they describe great moments of history centuries before the events are known to have happened. In fact, unreliable medieval records have been recognized as such a problem that in 1986, a large archaeological conference was held in Munich solely on that very topic. Illig's interpretation was that there was clearly something fishy going on with date calculation and counterfeit documents. What's more, theorists argue that other historical facts simply do not add up. For example, the existence of Romanesque architecture in 10th century Western Europe seems anachronistic, considering the time that was supposed to have passed since the fall of the Roman Empire. The phantom time hypothesis suggests that the space between the two eras was actually much shorter than we've been led to believe. Illig also disputed the reality of Charlemagne, the king of the Franks who united most of Western Europe during the early 9th century and laid the foundations for modern France and Germany. Illig wrote that, "Comparing all the biographies, I soon noticed that this ruler's achievements would have required the lives of 2, 3, or 4 normal men." The phantom time hypothesis offers possible masterminds behind the invention of the early Middle Ages. One such example is the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, who ruled towards the conclusion of the 10th century. Dr. Hans Ulrich Niemitz argues that the emperor actually lived during the 7th century, but wanted to reign in the year 1000 AD, as it suited his understanding of Christian millenarianism. Alongside Pope Sylvester II, he and chroniclers reconstructed the past, creating Charlemagne as the model hero he himself wanted to be. During the 7th century, when Niemitz suggests Otto III really lived, illiteracy was rife, and nobody owned a clock. To find out what day it was, members of the public had to ask a priest. With both scholars and religious leaders on his side, it could have been easy for Emperor Otto to carry out such a swindle. However, the majority of academics don't place much credence in the theory. Despite theorists' accusations of imprecision and misrepresentation, a variety of scientific dating techniques, such as dendrochronology or radiometry, corroborate the timeline taught to us in history lessons. Meanwhile, specific objects like coins and manuscripts attributed to Charlemagne and Alfred the Great, among others who are supposedly fictional, would require such a massive effort on the part of the conspiracists that it is almost impossible to imagine them pulling it off. Furthermore, astronomical events like eclipses and Halley's Comet can be accurately dated to the same time that medieval records mention them, and detailed records from China synchronize with European events, according to the Gregorian calendar. As for the error in the Gregorian calendar, removing just 10 days instead of 13, there is a strong argument that it was deliberate. Pope Gregory XIII wanted the calendar corrected by just 10 days instead of 13, because then the date of Easter would match the official date agreed for it at the Council of Nicaea in AD 325, which was calculated using the vernal equinox. Nevertheless, even critics admit that the phantom time hypothesis cannot be completely and definitively disproven. So we must ask ourselves, based on the evidence available, could it really be possible that nearly 300 years of wars, people, artifacts and documents were just invented? In 1958, in a small lab at Oxford University, a biological revolution was born. A young scientist called John Gurdon cloned an animal from a single cell for the first time in history.
Hello. This Soul Job video will be addressing the hidden agenda between the calendar, the timeline that we use, and clocks, watches, and every tool that we use to maintain time. You see, today was a really big day overall just because I found out that many people are actually more into the truth than I actually expected them to be. About 3 or 4 years ago was the first time that I truly discovered how deep in the illusion that we were. You see, we were being fed all the information about consciousness through mainly religious reformation, economic reformation, and political reformation. But once you actually are conscious, you can understand that all these things are just the surface. So today, we are actually going to make a great leap forward for consciousness and the truth and those who are rising, because we're the first group of people, truly the first group of people, to actually question and challenge this information. So with that being said, why is it that for years and years at a time, we are perceiving our lives and relating age to a calendar? And inside of that calendar, it is governed by what is called time. Time and space go hand in hand. And that is exactly why our ancestors used to study these two aspects non-stop. And this is what we call the subconscious in reality. The reason I'm bringing this up is because there was a time that we call BC. Now, BC is actually the time before what we call time was manufactured by humans. And today this video is going to address many things, but the main things one of the first things I want to introduce at least is the fact that before what we know to be time existed, there was no such thing as a year. Because time was cyclic. Because once you realize that time is cyclic and not linear, which is what we've been taught it to be through evolution and many other things, many other devices, but the maintaining of dominance that we have over us, the restriction of dominance that we have over us, is mainly brought by this very idea of time alone. And today you will learn that Christianity, religion, politics, everything that you thought to be consciousness before is all truly allowed to happen because of this one device that you've been given. It is not a map. It is not a Bible or a Torah or a Quran or the Book of Dead or nothing like that. It is truly
we shall never know just how many historical documents are in fact counterfeit. History in general goes hand in hand with the history of forgeries. Countless chronicles as well as works of art and literature have been considered authentic for centuries before becoming denounced as counterfeit. A presumed fragment of Cicero's De Consolatione discovered by the famous humanist scholar Sigonius only became identified as a work of the latter 2 centuries after the death of the author. We would probably still believe in Cicero's authorship of said fragment if it hadn't been for the discovery of Sigonius' written confession. Similar examples are rather abundant. The Thespian poet Lucius Verus, who turned out to be a 18th-century Dutch scientist by the name of Herkens, plagiarizing from the 16th-century Venetian author Carrario, classical texts sold to the Leipzig library by a certain Schoenus in the 1920s and so forth. Think of just how many remain undiscovered. After all, the larger part of the iceberg always remains underwater. However, there may be an equal amount of valid historical documents in existence that were declared forgeries due to their being at odds with the official history. Anatoly Fomenko, the prominent mathematician, was the first to apply natural scientific methods to historical data, coming up with a revolutionary theory which implies a radical revision of history as we know it. This theory finally explains such historical oddities as the existence of Christian tabernacles in the pagan town of Pompeii and the Ottoman Turks referred to as Persians in medieval documents. It is rendered in Fomenko's fundamental work entitled, History, Fiction or Science, which is finally out in English.
This book will change your entire perception of history forever. What if ancient Rome, Greece and Egypt were invented during the Renaissance? What if the Old Testament was a rendition of events in the Middle Ages? What if Jesus Christ was born in 1053 and crucified in 1086 AD? Sounds unbelievable? Not after you've read History, Fiction or Science by Anatoly Fomenko, the leading mathematician of our time.
Popular fiction dealing with conspiracies of one sort or another is actually quite tame as compared to reality. Dan Brown pens a possible conspiracy of the Church against the memory of its originator Jesus. He follows unknowingly in the steps of Martin Luther, who started his Protestant revolution with accusation of papal conspiracy in the matter of Constantine's testament. Well, Martin Luther was right and Constantine's testament was false. Remember, poor Martin Luther had as media outlet nothing better than the doors of the Wittenberg's cathedral. Dan Brown has mass media at his disposal. The Roman Catholic Church, for instance, is involved in a much greater hoax than the most daring writer could possibly conceive of, one that deals with the very foundations of history itself. The above statement is neither an exaggeration, nor a metaphor. Very few people are aware that the BC AD chronology as we know it was created by a handful of Jesuits in the 16th-17th century, Joseph Scaliger, Dionysius Petavius and their successors. We have grown so accustomed to a timeline that runs through many millennia, from the Egyptian pyramids to the present day, that the mere thought of questioning its veracity seems perfectly preposterous, just like the notion of a rotating Earth must have seemed in the epoch of Galileo Galilei, and just as heretical. But nevertheless, the entire conception of ancient and medieval history known to us today owes its existence to a 16th-century Jesuit hoax. A hoax that has finally been exposed with the aid of astronomy, mathematical statistics and modern computational facilities by one of the world's leading mathematicians, the Russian academician Professor Anatoly Fomenko. His fundamental work on chronology, history, fiction or science, now available in English, is more fascinating than Dan Brown at his wildest. Yet it is truly a non-fiction work, That goes to say, everything else you have read about history should probably classify as fiction.
This book will change your entire perception of history forever. What if ancient Rome, Greece and Egypt were invented during the Renaissance? What if the Old Testament was a rendition of events in the Middle Ages? What if Jesus Christ was born in 1053 and crucified in 1086 AD? Sounds unbelievable? Not after you've read History, Fiction or Science by Anatoly Fomenko, the leading mathematician of our time.